Hello again and welcome back to the channel. This is Michael from TOEFLresources.com, and today I'm very happy to present the 2021 version of my guide to the third TOEFL speaking question. In today's video, I'm going to start by talking about the structure of the question. I'll discuss how ETS actually designs the question week after week. I'll continue with a sample question. I'll give you a template that you can use on test day, and I'll give you a complete sample answer. So first up, the structure. Now, the structure of the question is critical to understand. Like, ETS uses the same basic structure every week, just with a few minor variations. And if you can understand this, I think you'll have a much easier time when you actually answer the question. So first up, you're going to read an article about an academic topic, and it's going to be about 100 words long, and you'll be given either 45 or 50 seconds to read it. After that, you'll listen to a short lecture on the same topic. It'll be about 1 or 2 minutes, and it will illustrate the topic using either 1 or 2 examples. Next, you'll be given 30 seconds to prepare, and then you'll speak for 1 minute. As you speak, your job will be to summarize the article and the lecture. And just how you can do that is what we're going to be talking about for the next 10 minutes. So let's look at a sample article. This is very typical of what is used on the TOEFL. First up is a title. The title is very clear, and the title is actually the same as the topic or term that's being discussed in the question. In this case, it's convergent evolution. At the beginning of the article, generally you get some background information, which doesn't specifically define the term or the concept. So in this case, the term is convergent evolution, but the background information here at the beginning is a definition of evolution in general. Next up, most of the time, you get the specific definition of the specific term. So here we learn exactly what convergent evolution is. Now, this is the most important part of the reading. You really need this detail. After that, there's some more supporting details, more specific details. These are much less important, and as you'll see, you really don't need to include this stuff in your answer, but you should pay attention because it is a preview of what you're going to hear in the lecture. Now, the main variation you might get in the article is that this key definition, it could be in the opening line. I don't think that'll make things too much more difficult for you, but it does mean you need to pay attention because you really want to make sure you get this detail in your notes. So the reading goes away and then you hear the lecture. This is a transcript of a lecture. Of course, on the real test, you can only listen. You can't read it, but I'm giving you the transcript here so you can understand what's going on. Now, this is a very typical lecture, and it's got 2 separate examples. First up is an example about pronghorns and antelope, and next up is an example about bats and dolphins. At the beginning of the example, the speaker tells you what he's going to talk about. So he specifically mentions pronghorns and antelope, and then he gives you all the details about them. Now, in this case, I noticed 3 main and separate details. There's one about their habitats, there's one about the features, and then he talks about the legs and the lungs. So these are 3 fairly discrete, fairly distinct details. Over here, I found like 2 main details. This is very typical. In the lecture, you're probably going to find like 5 or 6 key details that you can include in your answer. There could be more, there could be less, but ideally you're looking for 5 or 6 good details to put into your answer. There's a variation where at the beginning of the lecture, the speaker kind of pretends like it's a real classroom. So he'll say something to the students like, you've all read the article, and now I really want to talk about some good examples of this. That's stuff you can safely ignore. It tends to pop up whenever the lecture is a little bit shorter. Now, the other main example is when there's just one long example for the whole lecture. Now, that can be a little bit trickier, but it kind of goes in the same way. At the beginning of the lecture, he tells you what he's going to talk about, and then he'll give you 5 or 6 key details about that one example. Now, I don't have one of those for you today, but if you come back to the channel in a few months, I'll try to make up a video where I show you one of those. And once that's available, I'll put a link to it in the video description down below. In those cases, however, it's important to keep in mind that the lecture is often about a scientific experiment, or it's about an incident from his own life, which illustrates the concept. They happen to be quite similar to the lectures you hear in TOEFL Speaking Question 4. But anyways, most of the time, the lecture kind of looks like this. All right, so after you've done the reading and you've listened to the lecture, the question prompt appears on the screen, and it's going to look like one of these. Basically, it's going to say, describe what convergent evolution is and how the professor's example illustrates this idea. Or in other cases, it might specifically ask you to use the examples from the lecture. Like, it'll actually mention what the examples are in the question prompt. No matter what style the question prompt is, however, you're going to answer the question in exactly the same way. And I'll tell you how to do that in just a minute. In any case, you're given 30 seconds to prepare your answer and 1 minute to speak. And you cannot see the reading while you're preparing or speaking. Once the reading goes away, it is gone forever. All right, so how do you structure your answer? Well, if you wish, you can use a basic answer template. This is the one I teach to my students. First up, you state and define the concept according to the reading. Then you mention the concept, and you tell me what it is. Then you can have a basic transition, something like the professor elaborates on this. Then you state the first example and you give some details. First he explains, and then you summarize the example and you mention all the details. In the template screen here, it's just one sentence for details, but of course in your answer, you'll include 2 or 3 or even 4 sentences. Next up, you state the second example and you give all the details. Now, some of you might be saying, hey, why are you using the same verb explains here? Well, I'm just trying to keep the template as concise and as easy to use as possible. If you want to change this one word to a different verb for the second example, be my guest. That's totally okay. But frankly, one word is not going to affect your score too much. Now, the other question is, what do I do if there's only one example? In that case, just delete this last part. Get rid of it totally. And just say, first he explains, and then summarize the example and give the details. And you might be asking, is it okay to say first if there's just one example? And the answer is, yeah, that's totally fine. This one word is not going to have a major impact on your score. You can change it if you want. If you want to say he explains and then mention the example, that's fine too. No big deal. I do want to emphasize that your score doesn't come from the template, right? The template isn't a magic bullet. Your score is coming from all the details you include here, and it's coming from the quality of your pronunciation and your intonation and your grammar. The template is just a structure. It's just a guideline. Don't get too obsessed with it. Use it if you want, but just remember that your score comes from your real fluency. Anyways, here's a sample answer that I've put together based on this question. And you can see the red parts I use the template and the black parts I fill in the blanks. I start by very quickly mentioning the term and defining it. And then I've got the examples and the details. Now, I want to draw your attention to the first line here of the first example. I say, first he explains why antelope and pronghorns look similar. So this is a little summary of everything he talks about there. A lot of students wish to use something like, first he mentions antelope and pronghorns. That's fine, that's okay, but I'm looking for something a little bit more sophisticated, and I want that summary. Take a look down here as well. My answer reads, next he explains that bats and dolphins share a unique feature. So I've got a little summary of that whole example. I'm not just going like, next he mentions bats and dolphins. Now I've got that little summary. I think that's an effective way to answer the question. A couple other things maybe to draw your attention to. I've got this transitional phrase, as a result. Stuff like that is really useful, and I'll give you a few more phrases in just a minute. I've also got a mix of like conjunctions and coordinating conjunctions, words like but and which. This demonstrates a bit more grammatical sophistication. We use these to create like compound and complex sentences. That's something you really want to include in your answer. And indeed, here are some tips and tricks that might bring your answer to the next level. Use those transitional phrases. Use stuff like as a result or consequently or moreover and therefore. Like these are key words to use in all of the speaking questions. You really want to put those into your answer because both the human rater and the automated scoring system is looking for them. Next up, spend just about 10 to 13 seconds summarizing the reading, at most. Remember that most of your score is based on the listening summary. Now, actually, there are some teachers who tell you, don't even mention the reading. I think that's a really terrible bit of advice, but I do recognize that the listening part is the most important. So you really want to focus on that. As I said, use a mix of simple and compound sentences if you can, and I'll add to that complex sentences as well. If you don't know what I mean by simple, compound, and complex sentences, you really need to look up those grammatical terms. Lastly, remember that you should paraphrase, especially the reading, but also the listening. However, don't be obsessed. It isn't that important. I do sometimes encounter students who are just obsessed with that paraphrase and like they feel they need to change every single word. Don't do that. Don't go overboard. Paraphrase, but don't dwell on it. It's okay to repeat a few words and phrases from the sources, as you'll see if you go back and look at my answer again. I did a survey last year to kind of figure out what the most common topics are in this question. 60% of the students I talked to said they got a question related to biology or animals of some kind. That's super common, and it seems to be getting even more common. So, as you're practicing, maybe listen to some podcasts about animals, maybe read a National Geographic or something. That might make the test a little easier. 20% of the students said they got something related to business or marketing. 10% said they got something related to psychology or learning. And then 10% said they got something broadly related to like art or history or literature. Less common, and I kind of lumped them all together there. 35% of the people said they got one example, and 65% said they got two examples. All right, I am going to leave it at that, but if you have any questions, you can leave a comment down below, or you can check me out at TOEFLresources.com. That's my website, where you can find guides to all the sections of the test, and you can also sign up for my essay evaluation service or even my speaking evaluation service. Those are both still pretty popular, and a lot of students find them a very useful way to get ready for the TOEFL. All right, I'm going to leave it at that, but make sure to come back next week for a new video of some kind. Take it easy, guys. I'll talk to you then.